Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on eGroup's monthly webinar series, where today we'll be discussing Rubric and its data protection and management platform and how it can be utilized as a recovery solution on a consumption-based model. For those of you out there who are unfamiliar of eGroup, we are a comprehensive IT solutions provider. We've been in business since 1999. Obviously, a lot's changed in the world of IT over the last 20 years, but we found success by working with innovative technologies like Rubric and Microsoft to keep advancing businesses forward. Joining us today is Jason Webster, who is eGroup's Director of Cloud and Managed Services, who will talk a little bit more about IT recovery with Rubric and Microsoft. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Hey, thanks, Clint, and thanks everybody for joining today. Talking a little bit about IT recovery and exactly what that means for your business and some of the reasons around that with our partners at Rubric and Microsoft. So diving right in, IT recovery is the ability to recover anytime, anywhere, and I would even add any place to that conversation. And we'll get into a little bit about what I mean by anytime, anywhere, any place as we dive into it. So IT recovery. What we're going to talk about today is kind of defining the term, getting into the details of not only what does it mean to be able to recover, getting into topics like resilience, but also getting into topics like data management and some of the solutions that make that up. We'll talk a little bit about Rubric, a very, very powerful, differentiated approach to delivering data management, which includes data protection, data backup, data mobility, and all other kind of use cases that we'll talk about in the sample use cases. But we'll also talk a little bit about cloud, public cloud options like Microsoft Azure and what they can do to make your environment more resilient and give you the ability to recover in a kind of an operation model. And then we'll talk some more about models that fit your business. And I think this is really where it gets interesting because there's a lot of, having done this for many, many years and worked with traditional backup solutions going back to 1999 and, all the way to, what we're talking about today with data management, cloud data management, on-premises data management. There are a lot of differentiated models, whether it's a capital expense model, an operational expense model, as well as managed services that fit your business regardless of what size you are or, where you fit on the IT complexity spectrum. And then we'll get into some of those use cases, share some fun, some scary stories, but also some fun stories and some differentiated stories of where we've seen customers leverage data management techniques, particularly with Rubric and Azure, to protect their business, but also accelerate their capabilities. So let's dive right into it. I always love this statement to lead out because I think it speaks true that your protection from disaster is only as good as your ability to recover everything really fast. And really the focus is on those last three words, everything really fast. And to kind of put some context with that and describe that a little bit more, it's, whether it's the common, topic of we have a disaster or we've had some human error, something's gone wrong, the popular topic these days is ransomware. How long could a business run if its critical assets, data, or its applications that access those data, that data is not available? So is that minutes? Is that hours? Is that days? Is that weeks? And really understanding what really fast means to your business, as well as what everything means to your business. And then how do we protect that and recover for it and recover from it? So introducing Rubric a little bit. Rubric is a simple, scalable data management for all applications. And data management is intentionally differentiated from backup and recovery because it doesn't only mean, we want to go through and do the whole, we're going to bunker your data, we're going to take some snapshots, we're going to move it off site, we're going to do all that stuff so that we're protecting your data. Data management also means how can you leverage your data as a business to, increase your DevOps cycles, to increase data mobility between on-premises and the cloud, multiple data centers, cloud to cloud? How can you get data where you need it, when you need it? How can you recover that data anytime, anywhere, any place in the event of a disaster or a disaster avoidance strategy? But it's also built for the cloud generation. You guys can see the pretty little spinning graphic to the right. There's a lot of solutions that Rubric works with. And the idea here is that when it says it's built for the cloud generation, we're not just talking about protecting, SAN storage, or we're not talking about just protecting virtual machines or Windows virtual machines or VMware, Hyper-V, or Acropolis. We're also talking about containers. We're talking about Linux. We're talking about databases. And we're talking about native integrations with these applications in partnerships where Rubric understands these applications and can back them up the way they need to be backed up, but also allow you to access and manage that data the way those applications were intended to. So kind of creating that one step, one shot fits all type model, but also, going with the specifics of each application so that you can leverage the power of the solution. Also, when we talk about significantly reducing total cost of ownership, that's something that's easy to say, but how do we deliver on that promise? And we'll get a little bit into that with the different models. So before, I think everybody's seen kind of a slide like this where we talk about, the last 30 years of data protection and how not much has changed. A lot of organizations, they still have tape. They still have offsite archives. I know I've worked for organizations and I've been responsible for data protection strategies that included someone, grabbing a box of tapes out of the tape stack, putting them in a box, putting them in the back of their car and driving them at home at night, right? And that was considered offsite backup. The good news is we're a little bit further than that today, but there's a lot of complexity in that stack, right? We introduced backup storage. Everybody knows this, right? So it's the idea there was tapes were slow. We couldn't recover off tapes fast enough. So we started writing the disk, various, tiers of storage. You had your production storage, and then flash came along. You wanted fast storage for production, slow storage for backup. All of that, you were able to recover a little bit faster. But now you still had those long-term retention strategies of you have to write it to something that can actually be picked up. It's really hard to pick a SAN up out of the stack, load it into a car every night and get it off site. And, it can be cost prohibitive to be able to buy two SANs so that you can replicate dual copies of that data to an off-site location in a different geography. So meet Rubric Cloud Data Management. What Rubric does with Cloud Data Management is they take everything from all that complexity and they put it in a box. So most of you have heard that may not be familiar with Rubric have heard of things like hyperconverged infrastructures, where you take storage, network, and compute, and you layer on top intelligent software to manage the interactions between them, and you put them all into a very low footprint 2U appliance box, and it runs it all. And then you can scale out your data center from a virtualization standpoint, from 1 node to 2 nodes to 3 nodes to 4 nodes to meet as little or as much capacity as you need, or as much capacity as you need. Rubric does the same thing for data management. If you're trying to protect 10 terabytes and you need to protect it really fast, you can have one brick. If you need to protect hundreds of terabytes or more across multiple data centers, you can have multiple bricks. And then you also have inside that intelligent software that's built on top of those physical appliances, the ability to select your cloud of choice. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Azure so that you can do what Rubric calls clouding out to those different solutions for not only just long-term archive or cloud archive, but also for cloud on capabilities, which we'll talk a little bit about. But the idea there is Rubric as a technology is really just a software fabric, a piece of very intelligent software built on top of hardware that is purpose-built and designed, or you can run it on top of your hardware as long as it meets the specifications, or you can run it in the cloud on top of virtual machines, because rubric's intelligence, rubric's capability, all of rubric's value is built into the software that is running on top of the hardware. Very much so a software company. So how does it work? You have your primary environment. And in your primary environment, it's typically your data center, or, in some cases, your data center is a co-location where you've got your equipment. In some cases, your data center is public cloud. But you have these applications running on top of it, whether it's VMware, whether it's Acropolis, whether it's Hyper-V, whether they're physical workloads that are running, all kinds of different things, from Windows to Linux to SQL servers to application servers to SAP to ServiceNow type workloads. You have a variety of workloads that are running in your environment. Rubric, with the brick, and going back to that low footprint, easy to install 2U appliance, allows you to get a quick start. Speaking from just experience of having done this with the eGroup team, the typical quote we get is, wake up, unpack the rubric, install the rubric, go have lunch, day's over. So what we're talking about here is, versus kind of that traditional model we were looking at with all that complexity and parts, you can really get that first rubric brick up and running as quickly as you can get it out of the box, get it in a rack, cable, power it, network it, give it IPs, and let it start discovering applications in your environment. And that can be done in hours versus days, weeks, and months of kind of bringing all the different legacy parts together and orchestrating them to work together. Kind of going back to the hyper-converged infrastructure conversation, where everybody understands, software orchestrating interactions between hardware. The great thing about Rubric, and specifically the purpose-built appliances, the bricks, is the rapid ingestion. It's flash optimized. It can parallel ingest snapshots and to eliminate that kind of stun. It has the ability to bring in lots and lots of data in parallel streams. So not just backing up one workload at a time. If you're kind of familiar with backing up databases or backing up large, virtualized environments, kind of how do you orchestrate that backup window so that you're not overrunning your storage? Rubric solves that with, the ability to bring in those parallel workloads and write to fast flash drives and have a large throughput capacity to be able to do it, but also allowing that software to manage that for you so that you don't have to manage those schedules. So when we're talking about rapid ingestion, we're talking about telling the Rubric client what you need to back up and letting it go do the work for you. And that's where we get into automation and intelligent SLA policy engine. So instead of going and doing all those schedules, you go out there and say, hey, and to simplify the numbers, we'll say, hey, here's my 20 virtual machines. Here's my SQL servers. Here's these different things. And you don't even have to tell them it's a SQL server. You don't have to tell them it's a domain controller. You don't have to tell them it's a Linux box. You basically say, hey, here's the credentials and here's the assets in terms of the range I want to discover. Rubric goes out and figures out what they are. And then you tell it, I want it to protect this amount of data. I want it to be available in this frequency, every 5 minutes, every 5 seconds, every 10 minutes, every day that you want it to be available. And whether it's a SQL server, a domain controller, an application server, Windows or Linux, it will go out there and say, okay, let me figure out from an intelligent software standpoint, how do I ingest all that information from the SLA you wrote and build that path for you and start protecting those workloads immediately. And when you do those policies, you can create multiple tiered policies for your kind of primary workloads, or maybe some workloads that need to be less protected because they're not as business critical. So think of it as, I'm going to tell it what I need. It's going to go out there and get it done. And in the event that it can't get it done, it's going to tell me that it can't get it done. And when it comes time to recover, one of the challenges we've always had is if you had a complete VM or a machine that was lost, in order to recover that VM, you've got to get that storage out of the backup location. whether that's on premises or off-site or on a tape, and you've got to get it back to the primary infrastructure, so copying a lot of data back from one location to another to bring it back online. Since Rubric, in essence, is a hyper-converged infrastructure appliance, you can actually skip a step there and instantly recover those VMs on top of the appliance itself. So if you're running a VMware environment and you're backing up VMware VMs and you need to restore one, you can actually restore it on the Rubric appliance. And then what happens in the background is the software goes to work in the background, moving that information back to the primary location when available, when ready, considering it's still good and stable and ready to go, and moves that seamless to the end user so when you go to recover, the end user gets their application instantly. It's back online, machine's powered up, they're back to work, and then the data's moving where it needs to be, the VM moves where it needs to be, all seamless to the end user. Or think about that if you had to recover 10 or 15 VMs. Everything's encrypted and it's immutable to ransomware. So in the event of a ransomware outbreak or something like that, something that, like with a traditional backup solution where you have a backup server that is running on top of a Windows or a Linux appliance, or you have backups that are stored in a certain format where credentials can access those, and you can actually get your backups encrypted, or maybe your backups corrupted, depending on the nature of the threat. Rubric protects against that by inserting that software layer in between them and making those backups immutable. Once they're written, that's it. That's the way they are. You have to write them again. Can't change them. You guys know that you're going to be able to recover from it. And then Cloud Out, as I mentioned earlier, gives you the ability to, if you have several weeks worth of data, and that's what you need to be able to recover really fast in your data center. Say you had 100 terabytes and only 25 of it represents the nearest term data, and 75 of it is just there to meet compliance, stuff that you hope you'll never need, stuff that you may have tolerance to recover slower, but you want to save on data center space, storage cost, cloud space, or you want to put that on a different tier of storage in the cloud for a lower cost. You can Cloud Out it, which basically allows you to archive information to blob storage in Microsoft Azure based on the tier that you want. And you can say, I want you to immediately replicate all my data for a double copy in the cloud, very low cost, cents per fractions of cents per gigabyte, just to have like a ready to go second data center that in case you need it. And then Cloud On allows you to actually be able to take that information that's in the cloud, regardless of where it was backed up, and restore that to the cloud. So say you had your primary data center, the total loss, you have your information in the cloud, you're running a Rubric cloud cluster, and you want to be able to spin up that information as VMs inside of a Microsoft Azure virtual machine. You can restore that information and build those VMs directly in the cloud, and then until you figure out exactly what you want to do from your primary data center standpoint. So with this, you kind of have the ability to recover anything, anytime, any place. So going back to the data center today, and all of you may not have this exact setup, but you can see the complexity in that. Rubric allows you to eliminate a lot of it, replace it with high performance, very low footprint bricks that can scale out one-to-many bricks, but also replicate to the cloud for replication and long-term retention, search capabilities, indexing, all that good stuff. So when you're talking about Cloud On, one of the great things about Cloud On too is that, as you can see with this diagram, as production servers, they're backing up, they're on the SAN, they're backing up to the Rubric brick. All of that information is deduplicated on the front end. So you're significantly reducing the amount of traffic you're going to be sending across not only your local network, but those wide area network connections for Cloud DR purposes. And given that it's, in the cloud, most things are, the most expensive thing in the cloud is whenever you have to spin up a VM and run CPU and memory two of the most expensive resources to consume. So if you're running this as a cloud cluster, a multi-node cluster that's built there and you've already budgeted for it, and you want to do that serverless launch in the cloud so that you can actually spin those up on top of those bricks for temporary purposes, for maybe it's testing, maybe it's test dev development, maybe it's an actual failover and you need to get some workloads online. Those nodes that are running your Rubric Cloud Cluster on the Azure side are already VMs that you're paying for. They're already performing VMs. They're designed to perform the same way as the physical brick in your data center and can spin up in the same way as they do on premises on top of those VMs without additional cloud costs, because you're running on the production workloads that you already have. And certainly, big asterisk there, because it all depends on, what performance you require in a DR scenario. Some can run on a degraded state, some want it to perform, but the good news is you have the option for each. It all just comes down to planning exactly what that cost would look like. On the Rubric side too, the one thing I want to focus on this slide is really that API first architecture. I think one of the forward thinking themes that you see with Rubric is that, and why you call it a cloud generation appliance and a cloud friendly solution is the API first architecture. And the definition of that is everything that you can do, everything that Rubric does on their appliances with their software is driven through an API. And that API is available to you to extend, to integrate, and to leverage into your own business processes. And this is really where you get out of backup and recovery. Backup and recovery should be simple. I would argue Rubric makes it very simple to back up, especially when you define SLAs and you just tell it what you need and it goes to work and gets it done and tells you if there's any issues that need your attention. What you can now focus on is, where does my data need to be? Whether you have dev teams, whether we have a customer that's written their own DevOps tools, from a scripting and automation standpoint, wrote them well before some of the ones that were publicly available, forward-thinking development organization. They can actually integrate, as well as all the popular DevOps tools out there, or orchestration tools or automation tools, can integrate with Rubric to take additional snapshots. If their developers want to push a button, grab a copy of production and bring it up in a development environment on premises or the cloud, they can do that, and they can automate that entire life cycle, because the same power and functionality that's available to Rubric as a brick through the cloud, through the web interface, is available to the developers to be able to expand upon. So this slide, and we'll deliver these after the presentation to everybody so that they can see it, is to give you an idea of what we mean when we say this is a powerful physical appliance. It also gives you an idea of sizing and scale and what you can do with these when you're protecting information with that parallel ingest, as well as when you need to recover upon it. So, as I mentioned earlier, I think backup and recovery is an exciting topic. Rubric's certainly making it more exciting. They're making it more simple. But I also love what Rubric's done, and we, eGroup, have been working with them side by side as kind of an inaugural partner to work with them on not only just delivering capital expense models. And, for those that don't want to speak the finance term, that's, if you want to come buy a brick from us or multiple bricks, we're happy to do that. We're happy to sell those to you. We're happy to help you deploy those. You're going to love the solution. You can own it. You can own it for a period of time, do the traditional support cycles, and refresh the hardware on your normal process. If that's the type of business you guys are and you want to operate, there's no problem with that. It's a very successful model. It's been around for a long time, and I assume it will continue to be around in the future. So I think we all understand exactly what a capital expense model looks like with physical hardware. But on the operational side, this is a new model that's been introduced by Rubric and eGroup, where if you want all the benefits of the capital expense, but you want to pay the small upfront fee for the initial implementation and acquisition of the bricks, whether it's going to live in your data center as physical appliances, or in the cloud as cloud clusters, or both. And you want to pay it on a subscription-based model where you pay as you grow, and the as you grow is in terms of how many gigabytes, terabytes you protect. We have that model as well. And that's something that's unique to eGroup and a very small handful of partners across North America, where we can allow you to protect information onto a physical appliance. And then when you're talking about your source data, I'll take that 100 terabyte example that we were using earlier. You pay based on the terabytes per month that you protect when the metering happens once a month. But you don't pay for the 100 terabytes because we're doing the duplication and we're doing compression. So you're actually metered on your back-end terabytes. So let's say that we'll take a really conservative number and we can cut that number in half. We can probably do better than that in most cases, right? Probably significantly better in a lot of cases. If we cut that number in half, you're only paying 50 terabytes during that metering. But also you have the ability to cloud out. So say of that 50 terabytes, you really only need to store 25 on the brick, and the other 25 or 200 over a period of time get stored in cheap cloud storage. The metering only happens for that back-end terabytes that live on the brick. So you have a way to protect that near-term data, to be able to recover everything really fast, but also protect for a long-term retention at an extremely low cost by leveraging cloud storage. And eGroup, as a 4 times gold Microsoft partner, working with the cloud, since Azure was a thing, as well as working with data center technology, working with a lot of storage, backup and recovery, can help build that model that makes sense for your business so that we can go back and show you that original statement is true, that you can operate all of this, have greater performance, greater long-term retention at a lower total cost of ownership. And then also, there's the you manage model. Going back to, if you want to buy a brick, you can certainly buy a brick and you can certainly manage it all by yourself. And, you can do your SLAs, you can do all your recovery tests, you can make sure your updates and all of that are working, and you can manage that with your existing IT team. But in the event you want to allow eGroup to manage that, we can manage the whole thing, or we can manage part of it. We have a managed services model based on the same metrics that Rubric does backup on an operational basis, that terabytes per month, gigabytes per month metering, that you pay for managed services as your data grows. And again, it's based on that back-end terabytes protected, not the full source terabytes that you're protecting in your production workloads. So CapEx, OpEx, you manage, we manage, or somewhere in between, we can support them all. So how does an operational model work? You can see it with the physical appliance the same way it would in a typical scenario. The only difference is Rubric Air replaces Rubric Edge, which is a software-based appliance. Just, in a VMware world, that's an OVA file. You deploy it to a VMware environment. You can have up to 3 of them per remote site. Remote sites are typically, think of like, remote offices where I may have some IT, some imaging data, some files, some print servers, some domain controllers, things like that I want to be able to recover. And I want to be able to do that with a limited hardware footprint. You can deploy those up to 3 of them per site. Rubric Edge is in the CapEx model. Rubric Air is in the OpEx model. And that replicates back to your primary data center's brick, so that you have off-site protection back in your data center. You still only have to manage the SLA. You don't have to manage the complexity of all the replication. You can throttle it. You can do all that good stuff, and you can still cloud out Azure storage for long-term retention. But also, if you're a cloud forward-thinking organization where you're saying, I'd like to get things more to the cloud, I don't necessarily want to deploy bricks in my data center, or maybe I want to have Microsoft Azure Infrastructure as a Service be my main data center in this scenario, you can build a cloud cluster. and the minimum cloud cluster is 4 D3 V2 VMs, architected the same way if you go back to the sizing models as the R333 appliance to run a rubric cloud cluster, leveraging infrastructure as a service with the same scalability of that cluster to be larger than the baseline or smaller, leveraging Azure VMs as its underpinnings. And then your primary data center, where you may have less IT because you've been engaging in a cloud migration or you're in a hybrid scenario, Rubric Air can protect that, replicate it to the cloud. Same thing with those remote offices. But in this case, Microsoft Azure is acting as your primary data center using no physical appliances anywhere, software-based clusters running on top of Azure VMs. And then with the managed services, it's the help you need before and when you need it. And we always say before and when you need it because it's the thoughtful preparation into your backup and recovery and your data management policies to understand the common things, like how does it need to be protected? How am I going to recover it? What should I do in the event of disaster? Are we prepared? How are the users going to access it? Your traditional business continuity and disaster recovery planning that eGroup can do as a service for you guys, but also, the monitoring and management of things. And when you get into an agreement of a managed services, there's a lot of details. But the moral of the story of the slide is, again, you can manage it, we can manage it, or somewhere in between. eGroup is flexible, and we have the options to be the best fit, right fit for your business to be able to manage as much or as little as you need it to make sure that you're successful and you have the ability to recover and you understand the cost of things of recovery when you're talking about replicating things to the cloud, pulling data out, and that there's no surprises in your recovery environment. So diving into some use cases and source. Yeah, this is a common one, but it's one that we see more and more and more and more of. And it's been something that we started really hearing about, many years ago, but definitely within the last 2 years. And it's spun up more within the last 6 months as everybody that reads the news understands that things like, I heard a great story and I have no way to validate this, but that chips and credit cards secured the credit card industry so much that the bad actors in that space are now pursuing ransomware strategies inside of IT. So maybe that's the reason we're seeing a spike in this. Maybe not. Maybe it's just, the availability of the tools is spreading rapidly. But this customer had 7 data centers nationwide in Azure and IS. And they, for the most part, do the right things. They're a smart group. They've got a great staff, great people. If you ask them, can we recover our information, they would have said, yes, absolutely. They were evaluating Rubric at the time. They were aggressive in acquisitions of other business. And when I say aggressive, they were, bringing on, growing their business. Multiple groups were integrating. And gaps in admin security through a domain trust and, an acquired domain allowed an admin account that was also a user account to be compromised and spread east-west throughout the entire network across the VPNs and all the different circuits and networks that were in place, and encrypt as much as 70% of their VMs and over 100 desktops. And 100 desktops was relatively a small footprint for this organization, so they were lucky there. The backup server that was actually recovering goes back to the original story I was saying. It was encrypted as well. So to be able to get their backups from the tapes and from the disk, they were going to have to rebuild the backup environment, figure out how to reconnect it to those data stores, get it on the exact versions just to start restoring information. And they weren't able to immediately look and say, we're protected as of this time. Our backups were done at this time. They only had the logs that they typically do, and they do very well. So recovery was estimated at 2+ weeks for a full recovery. I think even in this case, a full recovery is a large goal, right? Because they're currently going through the process, and they've been at it for many months of rebuilding all the IT that was affected. Because once something's been compromised, even after you clean it, you kind of have to build it fresh to ever trust it again. So full recovery entails a lot more than just a return to service. So, long story short, it was in their best interest to pay the ransom and move forward in that regard. And again, that's an organization that would have said they were well prepared from a backup and recovery strategy prior to that, but certainly learned the hard way, even doing a lot of things right, some of the things that can go wrong. Another organization, on a more positive note, leverages Rubric to do more of a data management strategy, which was they have the need where they're ingesting a lot of information from their customers, putting it into databases, cleaning it up, and representing it through a variety of applications. And when they ingest this data, sometimes it doesn't come across clean, and sometimes they don't have a way to know that by all the filters they put in place to kind of warn them, because, you know, if a 1 to 2, there's only a logical way to figure that out in the system based on the type of data that they have. So when they're doing this across thousands of their customers and across, you know, hundreds and hundreds of SQL databases, they didn't have a good way for their service desk personnel at the end of the month, when someone's looking at this data and saying something's wrong and needing it fixed immediately, but also needing it fixed and tested all the places that use that data to make sure, or use that data to make a future calculation to be accurate. They don't have a clean way of being able to do that quickly. It would take them, they have to wait till the next day, load the backup from the night before into a test dev system, go through the information, figure out what went wrong, and then actually make the change in production directly. In a rubric, now they're able to take that information, they're able to immediately power on a copy of that information in an isolated environment, you know, from 5 minutes ago, 10 seconds ago, the nearest checkpoint where they can actually do it, bring it online, figure out what's going wrong, test it, and then integrate that information right back into production without as much of a risk or a threat, with no impact to the production resources whatsoever. Rubric also, a couple weeks ago, announced that they're acquiring Datus.io. And Datus.io is a similar company to Rubric. As you can see, has a lot of solutions that can be ingested with their software-based solution. But I think further paints the picture of where Rubric is going as a company, which is to not focus so much on the hardware. The hardware is an easy part, right? It's really fast, it's hyper-converged, it's low footprint. You know, we're going to drive down the cost of that as much as possible because all the power is really in the software. But what this acquisition does is immediately extends Rubric's capabilities. And over the coming months, as they integrate them into a single platform, to consume more applications beyond, you know, SQL and VMs. Now we're talking about NoSQL, we're talking about Mongo, we're talking about NetApp, we're talking about Cisco HyperFlex, various other solutions where Datos had invested time to build those API connections to be able to ingest that information. Rubric's acquiring those capabilities to build a cloud data management solution that knows your applications and can work with your applications, not only in traditional 3-tier application architectures, but also in modern cloud deployment architecture, so that you're not talking about just protecting that information, you're talking about being able to orchestrate that information in a DevOps world. And lastly, I told you all at the beginning that we're going to talk about, you know, a way that we can show you guys the value of this, not just tell you the value of this. So we've worked alongside with Rubric and Microsoft to create a value pack proof of concept where we can get you a Rubric Air appliance, you know, or we can do this in a demo environment with a physical brick, or certain, you know, opportunities where we can actually get a demo brick on site, you know, depending on exactly what the scenario is. We can get you the technology. If you have an Azure subscription today, or you need one, we can get you spun up with one with our cloud solution provider, or an enterprise agreement, or pay as you go, all of the different ways that Microsoft can resell you an Azure agreement. We can get you that, and we can get funding for that in most cases. And eGroup is waiving the professional services to deploy this proof of concept. And what we're going to do during that proof of concept is we're going to spend 3 or 4 days showing you guys exactly how all this works, learning about your business. That's really the first part. We're going to spend that first half of that workshop day having you guys tell us, what's important to you. What's data protection mean to you? What downtime to your business mean to you? Where's your business continuity strategy? How do you want to recover? What's in your environment that needs to be protected? We'll spend the second half of that day, ideally in front of a whiteboard, drawing up exactly how this solution can solve those problems for you. And then following that, we're going to spend the next 2, 3, 4 days, depending on what it takes, implementing that solution so that you can have hands-on demos. You can see exactly how it works in your environment. You can play with it. You can have data protected instantaneously. You can recover it instantaneously. And then at the end of that, we're going to come back. And this can be as quick as 45 days, as long as 90 days. It really just depends on the type of solution that we're deploying. We want to see what value that drove for you. And we're confident that you guys are going to see so much value within this solution that you'll say, yeah, absolutely, I want this. Let's scale it out. Let's protect all our workloads. Let's solve our DevOps challenges. Let's get more information to the cloud, and let's be protected. So that includes a lot of different things, site-to-site VPNs with Azure if you don't have them, making sure the data is available and accessible, making sure all the networking is there. So beyond just the data protection, which you end up with at the end of this very short proof of concept, if you don't have it today, is a hybrid data center cloud environment, multi-cloud environment, whatever scenario works for you, all the plumbing and all the basics in place to make sure that you have the secure capabilities to deploy things in the cloud, have them interact with on-premises, deploy things on-premises, second data center, or whatever scenario that's required. And then we're going to test it. So, Clint, I'll take some questions and comments if we've got time or anybody wants to drop them in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. First question that has come in was, I've heard rubric associated with immutability and ransomware. Does this work, and can it really help me protect my environment against ransomware?
Yes, absolutely. So the way it protects from ransomware is, think if you had an application. It can be a physical, it can be a virtual machine, it can be a SQL database, and something got encrypted. The first thing that you're going to notice in a ransomware event is probably the HTML files that get dumped on your machine. With rubric, there's no Windows file system or file share or anything presented that allows that corruption to go across the connection and actually change those backups in those files, first of all, right? Because again, it's all done through the software. The software protects from that. It's not presented in any way where a command can go in, tell rubric to encrypt information across those files. So it's immutable. It's written once. It's not changed. There's no way to change it. There's no access to do that via current or what we suspect would be future ransomware events. So what would happen in that case is where you would have ransomware is you could immediately spin that workload back up, power down the one that was protected, spin it up to the last known good configuration, and bring it back online. But furthermore, typically when you have ransomware, what you want to do is you want to bring it up before to that last known configuration. You want to clean it to make sure the time bomb doesn't go off again. You want to make sure the VM's healthy. You want to take action on it before you reintroduce it to production, so that you block further spreading and all of that good stuff. And you can do that with one single server or many servers simultaneously based on the policy that you put in there from a recovery standpoint. But going even further, Rubric has introduced a product called Project Polaris that actually, from a ransomware standpoint, are really like latent malware, things like that. Typically what happens when you get ransomware is the idea is it comes in and it spreads out as far as it can, and then it waits for a single point in time and then simultaneously, quote unquote, detonates to cause the largest impact that it possibly can. It doesn't immediately go to work once it's on your system. What Project Polaris aims to do is look up the backups that are on your bricks using artificial intelligence, using cloud intelligence, using, kind of the hive mind of all the different services data that's out there to try to find latent ransomware that maybe someone else has already had a detonation event with. You have, but you haven't yet, so that it can alert you and clean that and protect you from that, or allow you to take action on that before harm ever happens. So not only recovery from ransomware, it's protection of the data so that ransomware can't corrupt your backups, like the customer scenario we were talking about with some legacy backup solutions, but also intelligence to help you prevent it from ever happening. Great questions.
Thanks, Jason. And the last question we have is, does Rubric protect virtual and physical devices?
Yes, absolutely. So agent-based as well as integration into VMware, Hyper-V, Acropolis, your flavor of virtualization and physical appliance. Perfect.
Thanks, Jason. I believe that's all the questions we have today. Just want to thank you as well as everyone that was able to attend today's webinar. We will have a recording of the webinar following the event, so please feel free to pass that along to other members of your IT team that you think would be, could benefit from learning a little bit more about Rubric and how it plays in your data center. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.